The most beautiful music in life is often played after the strings of our heart have been broken and carefully mended back together. The silence in Eleanor Winter's apartment was deafening. At 67, she had grown accustomed to the quiet, but today it felt different, heavier, more accusatory. Her fingers hovered over the keys of her old upright piano, not quite touching them. She hadn't played in months, not since Richard had passed. The instrument stood as a monument to a passion she had sacrificed decades ago when dreams of Juilliard and concert halls were replaced by diapers and school lunches. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. This story might just change how you see yourself and what you're capable of, no matter your age. Eleanor's reflection stared back at her from the polished black surface of the piano lid. Gray hair pulled back in a neat bun, lines etched around, eyes that had once sparkled with ambition. Those same eyes now held a quiet resignation that had settled in so gradually she hardly noticed its arrival. The phone rang, shattering her reverie. Her son's name flashed on the screen. "Mom, we need to talk about the piano," Michael said without preamble. His voice carried that tone, the one he used when he thought he knew what was best for her. "Lisa's sister Vanessa has been looking for one for her daughters. They're both showing real talent. And Michael, that piano was your grandfather's gift to me when I was 16. Eleanor interrupted, her voice steadier than she expected. "It's not just furniture." "I know, Mom, but you barely play anymore. It's just collecting dust, and Vanessa's girls could really use it. They have actual potential." The word stung more than he could possibly know. Actual potential. As if hers had expired, evaporated with age like perfume left too long on a dresser. "We'll talk about this when you visit on Sunday," she said finally. Ending the call before emotion could crack her composure. Eleanor's hands trembled slightly as she placed the phone down. The apartment suddenly felt too small, the walls closing in with memories of what could have been. She moved to the window, watching the Boston skyline shimmer in the late afternoon sun. 45 years ago, she had received her acceptance letter to Juilliard. The same week she discovered she was pregnant with Michael, Richard had been supportive in his way. "We'll figure it out," he'd said, holding her as she cried. But they both knew what it meant. In 1978, being a single mother and pursuing a career in classical piano weren't compatible paths. Richard proposed. She accepted. And the Juilliard letter was folded away in a box of mementos she rarely opened. She had taught piano lessons from home while raising Michael, finding small joys in guiding other people's children toward the dream she had relinquished. Richard built a successful accounting practice, and they had what most would consider a good life. Not the life she had imagined at 18, but a good one nonetheless. The doorbell rang, startling Eleanor from her thoughts. She wasn't expecting. "Anyone, Mrs. Winters?" A young woman with bright eyes and a portfolio case stood in the hallway. "I'm Sophia Chen from the Boston Conservatory. Professor Williams suggested I reach out to you about piano lessons." Eleanor blinked in surprise. James Williams was an old friend, fellow pianist who had gone on to teach at the conservatory while she taught neighborhood children's scales and arpeggios. "I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding," Eleanor said, smoothing her cardigan. "I haven't taught in years." Sophia's smile didn't waver. "Professor Williams said you might say that. He also said you were the best teacher he ever had, and that you understand Chopin like no one else." A warmth spread through Eleanor's chest, pride perhaps, or nostalgia. James had been her most gifted student, the one who achieved everything she couldn't. "May I come in?" Sophia asked. "Professor Williams mentioned your Steinway. He said it has a soul." "It's not a Steinway," Eleanor corrected automatically. "Just an old upright." "But yes, it does have a soul." She stepped aside, allowing Sophia into her apartment. The young woman moved directly to the piano, eyes widening with appreciation rather than disappointment. "May I?" she asked, gesturing to the bench. Eleanor nodded, watching as Sophia sat, and positioned her hands. The first notes of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major filled the apartment, and Eleanor closed her eyes. Sophia played well, technically proficient, but lacking something essential. The emotion wasn't quite there, that understanding of the space between the notes. When Sophia finished, she looked up expectantly. Professor Williams said you could help me find the heart of the piece. Eleanor hadn't realized she was holding her breath. She exhaled slowly, decades of suppressed passion stirring within her. The heart isn't in the notes, she said quietly. It's in what you've lived. And what have you lived, Mrs. Winters? Sophia asked. Her question innocent but piercing. Eleanor's gaze drifted to the small collection of framed photos on the wall her wedding day. Michael's graduation, Richard's retirement party, a life of supporting others' dreams while her own gathered dust alongside the piano. Enough to know that Chopin wasn't writing about romantic love in that nocturne, she said finally. He was writing about longing for something just out of reach. Sophia's expression shifted to one of genuine curiosity. Will you teach me? Not just the notes, but ... That. Before Eleanor could respond, her phone buzzed with a text from Michael. Talk to Lisa. We're picking up the piano Sunday. Is thrilled. It's the right thing, Mom. Eleanor stared at the message, a strange calm settling over her. She looked up at Sophia, then at the piano that had been her silent companion through marriage, motherhood, and now widowhood. Yes, she said, her voice gaining strength with each word. I'll teach you, but we'll need to start soon. It seems my piano may not be here much longer. That night, Eleanor couldn't sleep. The apartment felt different somehow, as if Sophia's visit had awakened something dormant within its walls. She found herself at the piano at 3 a.m, fingers ghosting over the keys without pressing them, afraid that sound might make her emotions too real to contain. The piano had been her father's parting gift before he succumbed to cancer. Music will be there when words fail you, Ellie, he had told her, his voice already a whisper. She was 16 then, already showing promise that her high school music teacher called extraordinary. The upright wasn't a Steinway, but it was the finest her father could afford, purchased with his veterans' benefits and 3 months of overtime shifts at the factory. Eleanor finally pressed a key, the middle C ringing out in the darkness. Then another note and another, until she was playing softly. A piece she had composed herself during those early months of grief after her father's passing. She hadn't played it in decades, yet her fingers remembered every note. When dawn broke, Eleanor had made her decision. She reached for her phone and called a number she'd saved years ago, but never dialed. Berkshire Piano Movers and Storage. A cheerful voice answered. I'd like to arrange for a piano to be moved, Eleanor said, her voice calm and clear. And I need it done by Sunday morning. After making the arrangements, Eleanor opened her laptop, a gift from Michael last Christmas, that she rarely used, and began searching through old files. It took nearly an hour, but she finally found what she was looking for, the original receipt for the piano. Her father's will specifying it was hers alone, and the insurance documents listing it as a personal heirloom. She printed everything, hands steady as she placed the papers in a folder. Then she called her old friend Margaret, who had practiced law before retirement. Ellie, it's been too long. Margaret's familiar voice warmed the line. How are you holding up? I need your help, Maggie, Eleanor said, explaining the situation with Michael and the piano. I know it sounds petty. It's not petty, Margaret interrupted firmly. That piano is legally yours. And more importantly, it's part of who you are. Michael will be furious. Michael will survive, Margaret replied. The question is, will you? If you let this happen without standing up for yourself. After the call, Eleanor felt a strange lightness. She hadn't realized how heavy the weight of constant accommodation had become, always putting others' needs before her own, always being the one to bend. The doorbell rang at precisely 10 o'clock. Sophia stood there, portfolio in hand, looking both eager and nervous. I wasn't sure you'd still want to give me lessons, she admitted as Eleanor welcomed her in. I've been thinking about what you said yesterday, Eleanor replied, gesturing for Sophia to sit at the piano, about finding the heart of the piece. Before we start, I'd like to know why you play. Sophia looked startled by the question. To get into the master's program, she answered automatically. To build my career, Eleanor nodded, remembering her own ambitions at that age. And beyond that, what does music mean to you personally? The young woman's polished demeanor faltered. I don't know if I thought about it that way. My parents sacrificed a lot for my lessons. Failure isn't an option. I understand that pressure, Eleanor said gently. But Chopin didn't compose to pass examinations or please his parents. He composed because he had something to say that words couldn't express. Sophia's eyes widened slightly. What do you have to say, Mrs. Winters, through your music? The question hung in the air between them. Eleanor sat beside Sophia on the bench, their shoulders nearly touching. I've been silent for a very long time, she admitted. But I think I'm ready to find my voice again. She placed her hands on the keys and began to play not Chopin this time, but her own composition, the one she'd played in the early morning hours. When she finished, Sophia was staring at her with undisguised awe. Oh, that was beautiful. Is it published? I've never heard it before. No, Eleanor smiled faintly. It's just something I wrote a long time ago. You should publish it, Sophia insisted. Professor Williams always says great music deserves to be shared. Eleanor felt a blush creep up her neck. Let's focus on your CCO pin for now. They spent the next 2 hours working on the nocturne, Eleanor guiding Sophia beyond technical precision toward emotional authenticity. By the time Sophia left, promising to return the following day, Eleanor felt more alive than she had in years. She spent the afternoon calling piano storage facilities, confirming details with Berkshire Movers, and researching music publication. For older composers, each call, each small act of reclaiming her passion, felt like removing a stone from a wall that had been built around her heart over decades. That evening, Michael called again. Mom, Lisa and I were thinking we should come over tomorrow instead of Sunday. Vanessa has already hired movers for the piano, and they're only available tomorrow afternoon. Eleanor's heart raced, but her voice remained steady. That won't work for me, Michael. I have plans tomorrow. Plans? He sounded genuinely surprised, as if the concept of his widowed mother having an independent schedule was foreign to him. What plans? I'm giving a piano lesson, she said, the words feeling strange and wonderful on her tongue. My first in years. That's great, Mom, Michael said, his tone softening. But it's just one lesson. Surely you can reschedule. This is important for Vanessa's girls. My lesson is important too, Eleanor replied. And Michael, we need to talk about the piano. It's not yours to give away. Mom, his voice took on that patronizing tone she had grown to dread. We've been over this. You don't play anymore, and the girls need I do play, she interrupted, surprising herself with her firmness. I played for hours today, and regardless, the piano was my father's gift to me. I have the documentation. Silence stretched between them, tense and unfamiliar. They didn't argue, she and Michael. She had always been the one to yield to smooth things over. We'll talk about this on Sunday, he finally said, echoing her words from their previous conversation. But Mom, you need to be reasonable about this. After hanging up, Eleanor sat in the growing darkness of her apartment, wondering when reasonableness had become synonymous with self-erasure. When had she started believing that her desires, her passions, her very identity were less important than everyone else's? Saturday morning arrived with a clarity Eleanor hadn't felt in years. She woke before her alarm, made coffee, and sat at the piano, playing scales to warm up her fingers. The familiar exercises felt like greeting old friends who had been patiently waiting for her return. At precisely 9, the doorbell rang. 2 men in uniform stood outside. Berkshire Piano Movers, the older one said, tipping his cap. Mrs. Winters. Yes, thank you for coming, Eleanor said, stepping aside to let them in. Everything is ready. She watched as they expertly wrapped her piano in protective blankets, securing it with straps. They worked with a reverence that told her they understood. They weren't just moving furniture, they were transporting something precious. Where would you like us to take it, ma'am? The younger mover asked. Boston Piano Storage on Newbury Street, she replied, handing him the paperwork she'd prepared. I've arranged for a climate-controlled unit. As they carefully maneuvered the piano out of her apartment, Eleanor felt a momentary panic. What was she doing? Is this petty revenge against Michael? Or was it something else, something more fundamental? About reclaiming her own story. Once the movers had gone, she surveyed her living room. The space where the piano had stood for decades now gaped like a missing tooth. She placed a small side table there, temporarily arranging a vase of fresh flowers atop it. The change was jarring, but also strangely liberating. At 11. Sophia arrived for her lesson, stopping short when she saw the empty space. Your piano, she gasped. What happened? Safe, Eleanor assured her. I've moved it temporarily, while I sort some things out with my family. Sophia's brow furrowed. But our lesson, we're going on a field trip. Eleanor smiled, picking up her purse. There's a practice room at the conservatory that Professor Williams said we could use. I thought it might be good for you to work on a concert grand before your recital next month. The girl's eyes lit up. Really, that would be amazing. As they rode the subway to the conservatory, Sophia peppered Eleanor with questions about her own training, her compositions, her life. Eleanor found herself sharing stories she hadn't told in years about her father teaching her to play by ear before she could read music, about the recitals where she'd performed her own pieces, about the letter from Juilliard that had arrived the same week as the pregnancy test. What happened? Sophia asked softly. With Juilliard. Life happened, Eleanor replied, not unkindly. I made choices that seemed right at the time. Do you regret it? The question hung between them as the train rattled through a tunnel. Eleanor considered it carefully. I regret believing I had to choose, she said finally. I regret accepting that my dreams were less important than everyone else's. But I don't regret my son. I just wish I'd taught him to value my passions as much as I valued his. At the conservatory, Professor Williams greeted them warmly, embracing Eleanor like the old friend he was. It's about time you came back to these halls, Ellie, he said, his eyes twinkling behind wire-rimmed glasses. Your talent's been wasted on teaching chopsticks to reluctant children. Those children needed music too, James, she replied with a smile. But yes, it's good to be back. He led them to a practice room where a magnificent Steinway grand piano gleamed under soft lighting. She's all yours for the afternoon. I've got a faculty meeting, but I'll check in later. When they were alone, Eleanor gestured for Sophia to sit at the bench. Show me what you've practiced since yesterday. Sophia played the nocturne, and Eleanor could already hear a difference, not just in technique, but in emotional depth. When she finished, Eleanor nodded approvingly. Much better. Now, I'd like to try something. Play it again, but this time, think about someone you've lost, someone whose absence still aches. Sophia's hands hesitated over the keys. My grandmother, she said quietly. She died last year. She was the one who insisted I learn piano when I was little. Play for her, Eleanor suggested gently. Not for your professors or your parents or your future career. Just for her. This time when Sophia played, the music transformed. Notes that had been merely beautiful became transcendent, filled with longing and love and grief. When she finished, there were tears on her cheeks. That, Eleanor said softly, is what Chopin intended. They spent the next 2 hours working through the piece, refining passages, but always returning to that emotional core. By the time they finished, Sophia was playing with a maturity that belied her 20 years. Mrs. Winters, she said as they packed up to leave, would you play something for me? One of your compositions? Eleanor hesitated, then sat at the Steinway. The action was different from her upright at home, more responsive, the tone richer, and more nuanced. She began with the piece she'd played for Sophia the day before, then transitioned into something new, something that had been forming in her mind during the sleepless hours of the previous night. She lost track of time as she played, pouring decades of unspoken feelings into the music, her love for her father, her pride in her son, her grief. For Richard, her regret for the career she'd set aside, and most of all, her determination to reclaim her voice. When she finally lifted her hands from the keys, she realized the room had filled with people, students and faculty who had been passing by and stopped to listen. Among them stood James, his expression a mixture of pride and wonder. "Ellie," he said, approaching the piano, "that was extraordinary. Is it published?" She shook her head. "It's just something I've been working on." "Not anymore," he said firmly. "I'm putting you in touch with my publisher. And I want you to consider something else. We have an opening for an adjunct professor next semester, someone to teach composition to undergraduates." Eleanor stared at him, speechless. "Don't answer now," he continued, "but promise you'll think about it. Talent like yours shouldn't be hidden away." As Eleanor and Sophia left the conservatory, the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the campus. Students hurried between buildings, carrying instrument cases and scores, their faces bright with purpose and possibility. "Will you do it?" Sophia asked. "Teach here?" "I don't know," Ednor admitted. "It's been a long time since I've thought of myself that way, as a musician, a composer, a teacher at this level." "But that's exactly who you are," Sophia insisted. "You just forgot for a while." Eleanor returned to her apartment that evening to find 3 missed calls from Michael and a text message asking her to call him back urgently. She set her phone aside and made herself a cup of tea, taking it to the window where she could watch the city lights come on as dusk settled over Boston. When she finally called Michael back, his voice was tight with barely controlled anger. "Mom, Vanessa's movers went to your apartment today. They said the piano was gone." "Yes," Eleanor replied calmly. "I moved it to storage." "You what?" His voice rose sharply. "Why would you do that? We had an agreement." "No, Michael," she corrected gently. "You had a plan. I never agreed to it." "This is ridiculous," he sputtered. "Where did you take it?" "Vanessa's daughters have been practicing for weeks for their recital. They're counting on having that piano." "Sorry they're disappointed," Eleanor said, surprised to find she genuinely meant it. "But the piano is mine, Michael. It was my father's gift to me, and I've decided not to give it away." "This isn't like you, Mom," he said, his tone shifting from anger to concern. "Ever since Dad died, you've been ... different. Maybe we should talk to Dr. Levine about adjusting your medication." The suggestion stung more than his anger had. Eleanor took a deep breath before responding. "I'm not having a mental health crisis, Michael. I'm finally standing up for myself." "There's a difference," Lisa thinks. "I don't care what Lisa thinks." Eleanor interrupted. Another first. "This isn't about Lisa or Vanessa or the girls. It's about me remembering who I am." The silence that followed was heavy with shock. Eleanor had never spoken to her son this way, had never spoken to anyone this way in decades. "We're coming over tomorrow," Michael said finally. "This conversation needs to happen in person." After hanging up, Eleanor sat motionless, her tea growing cold beside her. The empty space where the piano had stood seemed to pulse with significance. She had crossed a line, one she hadn't even realized existed until now. The realization was both terrifying and exhilarating. Her phone buzzed. With a text from Sophia, Professor Williams asked if you'd consider playing at the student showcase next month. "Please say yes." Eleanor smiled, typing back. "Let me think about it." She slept deeply that night, without the aid of the sleeping pills she'd relied on since Richard's death. In her dreams, she was playing on a stage, her father watching from the front row, his face alight with pride. Sunday morning dawned bright and clear. Eleanor dressed carefully in a blue dress she hadn't worn in years, applied light makeup, and styled her hair. Looking in the mirror, she barely recognized herself, not because she looked younger, but because she looked present in a way she hadn't in a very long time. At precisely 11, the doorbell rang. Michael stood there with Lisa beside him, both wearing expressions that suggested they were preparing for an intervention rather than a family visit. "Come in," Eleanor said, stepping aside. "I've made coffee." They followed her to the living room, their eyes immediately going to the empty space where the piano had stood. "Mom," Michael began, his voice carefully modulated, "we're worried about you." "That's not necessary," Eleanor replied, pouring coffee into 3 cups. "I'm doing better than I have in years." "This isn't like you," Lisa interjected, her voice soft with practiced concern. "You've always been so generous, so willing to help others. And now, to take away something the girls were counting on." "I didn't take anything away," Eleanor corrected. "The piano was never theirs to begin with. It was never even yours to give, Michael." She reached for the folder she'd prepared and handed him the documents, the original receipt, her father's will, the insurance papers. "The piano was my father's gift to me when I was 16, she explained as he flipped through the papers. "It's been with me through every major event of my life. It's not just furniture to be passed around." "But you don't even play anymore," Lisa protested. "I do play," Eleanor said. "I played for hours yesterday at the conservatory. I've started composing again. And I've been offered a teaching position." Michael's head snapped up from the documents. "A teaching position? Where?" "Boston Conservatory. Adjunct professor of composition." "What's wonderful, Mom," he said, sounding genuinely surprised. "But why didn't you tell us you were interested in teaching again?" "Because you never asked," Eleanor replied simply. "You never asked what I wanted or what I dreamed about. You just decided what was best for me." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with decades of unspoken truths. "I didn't know you were still composing," Michael said finally, his voice smaller. "There's a lot you don't know about me," Eleanor said, not unkindly. "I've spent so many years being just your mother, just Richard's wife, that I almost forgot there was more to me. But I'm remembering now." Lisa shifted uncomfortably on the sofa. "What about Vanessa's girls? They were so excited about the piano." "I'm sure Vanessa can find them another piano," Eleanor replied. "One without quite so much history attached to it." "They'll be devastated," Lisa pressed. "They'll survive," Eleanor said, echoing Margaret's words from their phone call. "Children are remarkably resilient." Set the documents down on the coffee table. "So what happens now? You're going to teach at the conservatory and ... What? Become a concert pianist at 67. There was a hint of mockery in his tone that Eleanor chose to ignore. "I'm going to live the rest of my life on my own terms," she said. "I'm going to play music that matters to me. Teach students who are passionate about learning and stop apologizing for taking up space in the world." "No one's asking you to apologize for existing, Mom," Michael said, exasperated. "Aren't you?" Eleanor asked quietly. "Isn't that exactly what you're doing when you dismiss my attachment to the piano as sentimentality? When you suggest I need medication because I'm standing up for myself? When you make decisions about my belongings without consulting me?" Michael had the grace to look uncomfortable. Lisa, however, was not ready to concede. "I think you're being selfish," she said, her practiced concern giving way to irritation. "Vanessa has done so much for this family, and her girls have real talent. They deserve that piano more than some storage facility." Eleanor took a sip of her coffee, letting the accusation settle before responding. "You know, Lisa, for most of my life, I would have agreed with you. I would have put everyone else's needs before my own, because that's what women of my generation were taught to do. But I'm learning that there's a difference between generosity and self-erasure. The piano isn't in storage because I'm being selfish. It's there because I'm finally being self-respecting." Lisa's words hung in the air, the accusation of selfishness landing like a slap. For a moment, Eleanor felt the familiar urge to apologize, to smooth things over, to put everyone else's comfort above her own. But something had shifted within. Her, a tectonic plate of self-worth that had been dormant for decades, suddenly asserting itself. "I think we should go," Michael said, standing abruptly. "This clearly isn't the right time for this conversation." "When would be the right time?" "Michael," Eleanor asked, remaining seated. "When I'm too old or too ill to object, when I've forgotten who I am entirely." Her son flinched as if she'd struck him. "That's not fair." "None of this is about fairness," Eleanor replied. "It's about respect. I respected your choices, your dreams, your priorities for your entire life. I'm simply asking for the same consideration." Lisa stood, gathering her purse with sharp, angry movements. "Vanessa will be devastated. The girls were counting on that piano." "I'm sorry for their disappointment," Eleanor said, and meant it. "But they're young. They have their whole lives ahead of them to find their passions and pursue them." At 67. "I don't have the luxury of waiting another decade to reclaim mine." Michael looked at his mother as if seeing her for the first time not as the supportive, self-effacing parent who had always been in the background of his life, but as a woman with her own unfulfilled dreams and untapped potential. "We'll talk later," he said finally, his voice softer, "when everyone's had a chance to cool down." After they left, Eleanor sat in the quiet apartment, emotions swirling through her like autumn leaves caught in a gust of wind relief. Guilt, pride, uncertainty. She had stood her ground, but at what cost? Would Michael forgive her? Did it matter if he didn't? Her phone rang, startling her from her thoughts. It was James Williams. "Lee? I hope I'm not interrupting anything," he said when she answered. "I wanted to follow up on our conversation yesterday. The faculty committee is meeting tomorrow to discuss the adjunct position, and I'd like to put your name forward officially." "James," Eleanor hesitated. "I'm not sure I'm qualified. It's been so long since I've been in academia." "Nonsense," he replied firmly. "I heard you play yesterday. More importantly, I heard how you taught Sophia. You have exactly what our students need, not just technical knowledge, but emotional, intelligence, and life experience." "My son thinks I'm having some sort of breakdown," Eleanor admitted with a small laugh. "Maybe he's right. Or maybe you're finally having a breakthrough," James countered. "Look, I've known you for 40 years, Ellie. I remember the compositions you showed me before you set it all aside for family. That talent didn't disappear. It just went dormant. And now it's flowering again." After they hung up, Eleanor made herself another cup of tea and carried it to the window. The afternoon light was fading, casting long shadows across the city. She thought about the confrontation with Michael and Lisa, about James's offer, about the piano safely stored away from grasping hands. She thought about her father, who had worked extra shifts for months to buy her that piano. "Music isn't just about the notes, Ellie," he'd told her. "It's about having the courage to express what's in your heart, even when it's breaking." Her heart had been breaking for so long she'd almost forgotten what it felt like when it was whole. But now, with each small act of reclamation, she could feel the pieces knitting back together. The doorbell rang again. Eleanor sighed, bracing herself for round 2 with Michael. But when she opened the door, Sophia stood there, clutching her portfolio. "I'm sorry to come unannounced," the young woman said breathlessly, "but Professor Williams just called me. He said he's nominating you for the adjunct position, and he wants me to be your teaching assistant if you accept. Is it true?" Eleanor couldn't help but smile at Sophia's enthusiasm. "He mentioned it, yes, but I haven't decided yet." "You have to say yes," Sophia insisted, following Eleanor into the apartment. "Do you know how many students would kill to study composition with? You, after hearing you play yesterday. There's already a waiting list." "A waiting list," Eleanor echoed, incredulous. "But they don't even know me." "They know your music," Sophia replied. "Professor Williams recorded your improvisation yesterday. He played it for the graduate composition seminar this morning." Eleanor felt her cheeks flush with heat. "He did what?" "Don't be angry," Sophia pleaded. "It was beautiful." Everyone was asking who you were, where you'd studied, why they hadn't heard of you before. The idea that strangers had heard her music had connected with it, had wanted to know more about Herson. A thrill through Eleanor that was both terrifying and exhilarating. "I brought something for you," Sophia said, opening her portfolio and pulling out several sheets of music notation. "I transcribed what you played yesterday as best I could remember. I thought you might want it for your portfolio." Eleanor took the pages with trembling hands. There it was, her improvisation. The music that had poured out of her soul after decades of silence, captured in black notes on white paper. Seeing it written down made it real in a way that even playing it hadn't. "Thank you," she whispered, tears pricking at her eyes. "This is ... This means a lot to me. Will you play it again?" Sophia asked. "I mean, not now, obviously, since your piano is gone, but someday, maybe at the student showcase." Eleanor looked at the empty space where her piano had stood. Then, back at the music, in her hands tangible evidence of her creativity, her voice. "Yes," she said, the word feeling like a promise to herself as much as to Sophia. "Yes, I think I will." After Sophia left, Eleanor sat at her small desk and began to write not music this time, but words. A letter to Michael explaining not just her decision about the piano, but the larger journey she was on. She wrote about the sacrifices she had made willingly, the joy she had found in motherhood, but also the parts of herself she had set aside, believing they were incompatible with being a good mother, a good wife. "I don't regret the life I chose," she wrote, "but I do regret accepting the false premise that it had to be an either-or choice. That I could be a mother or an artist, but not both. That my dreams mattered less because they came second chronologically. I'm not trying to rewrite our history, Michael, I'm just trying to write a different ending to my story." She sealed the letter but didn't send it, setting it aside to reconsider in the morning. Some conversations needed to happen face to face. Instead, she opened her laptop and began researching piano rentals. If she was going to teach, if she was going to compose again, she would need an instrument. Her beloved upright was safe in storage, a symbol of her past and her heritage. But perhaps it was time for something new as well, a piano that represented not what she had preserved, but what she was building. The next morning, Eleanor woke early, feeling more rested than she had in months. She made coffee and sat at her desk, rereading the letter she'd written to Michael. It still felt right, honest, without being accusatory. She folded it carefully and placed it in an envelope, addressing it by hand, before she could second-guess herself. She grabbed her coat and walked to the post office 6 blocks away, dropping the letter in the mailbox. The simple act felt momentous, like casting a message in a bottle into the ocean, uncertain where it would land or how it would be received, but necessary nonetheless. On her way home, she stopped at a small cafe where she and Richard used to have Sunday brunch. The owner, Antonio, recognized her immediately. "Mrs. Winters, it's been too long," he exclaimed, ushering her to a table by the window. "The usual." Eleanor smiled, touched that he remembered. "Yes, please," as she sipped her cappuccino and watched the morning bustle outside. She felt a strange sense of peace. Whatever happened with Michael, with the teaching position, with her music, she had taken the first steps toward reclaiming her voice. The rest would unfold as it would. Her phone buzzed with a text from James. "Committee meeting at 2. We'll call you right after. Fingers crossed." Eleanor sent back a simple thank you and returned to her coffee, trying not to let anxiety about the committee's decision overshadow her morning. When she returned to her apartment, she found a small package leaning against her door. Inside was a USB drive and a note from Sophia. "Thought you might want a copy of this. It's already getting shared among students. You're becoming famous. S." Eleanor plugged the drive into her laptop, curious. A video file opened, showing the practice room at the conservatory. She watched, heart in her throat, as she sat at the Steinway and began to play. The camera angle wasn't ideal. Clearly someone had recorded surreptitiously from the doorway. but the sound quality was surprisingly good. Watching herself play was a surreal experience. She looked different than she imagined. More confident, more present. Her face, which she had grown accustomed to seeing as merely old in the mirror, looked animated, expressive, alive with passion as her hands moved across the keys. The music itself was better than she remembered, more structured, more intentional than she'd realized in the moment of creation. There were themes that developed and returned, tensions that built and resolved. It wasn't just emotional outpouring. It was genuine composition. When the piece ended, video continued for a few seconds, capturing the stunned silence in the room before applause erupted from unseen observers. The final frame showed Eleanor looking up, startled by the sound. Her face a mixture of surprise and shy pleasure. She closed the laptop, emotions swirling. Part of her was mortified that this private moment had been recorded without her knowledge, let alone shared. But another part, a growing part, felt a surge of pride. People had connected with her music. They had seen value in what she created. At 1:30, her phone rang. It was Michael. "Mom," he said, his voice tight. "I got your letter." Eleanor's heart raced. "I meant every word," she said quietly. "I know you did." There was a long pause. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said yesterday, about respect, and I think I owe you an apology," he said, the words coming slowly as if each one cost him effort. IDN, single quotes, I didn't see you. Not really. I saw my mother, but not Eleanor Winters, the musician, the composer. Tears pricked at Eleanor's eyes. "Thank you for saying that, Michael. Means a lot." "Lisa's still upset," he admitted. "Shh. Thinks you're being difficult." "I can live with that," Eleanor replied, surprised to find she meant it. "I've spent a lifetime being accommodating. Being a little difficult feels overdue." Michael laughed, a short, surprised sound. "You know, you sound like Grandpa when you say things like that. He never cared what people thought either. He cared about the right things," Eleanor corrected gently. "It's not about pleasing everyone all the time." There was another pause, more comfortable this time. "So what happens now?" Michael asked. "With the piano, with this teaching thing?" "Waiting to hear about the teaching position today," she said. "As for the piano, I'm not sure yet." "But it's not going to Vanessa." "I understand," Michael said, and for the first time Eleanor believed he might. "Will you let me know about the teaching job? I'd like to I'd like to hear more about your music sometime." After they hung up, Eleanor sat in stunned silence. Of all the outcomes she had imagined from her letter, this genuine understanding, even interest, had seemed the least likely. Perhaps she had underestimated her son, just as he had underestimated her. At precisely 3 o'clock, James called. "Ellie," he said, his voice jubilant. "It's official. The committee voted unanimously. The position is yours if you want it." Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth. "Unanimously." They watched the video, James explained. No one could argue with that kind of talent. "You'll teach 2 composition seminars next semester, starting in January. Small classes, advanced students." James: "I don't know what to say." "Say yes," he urged. "Say you'll finally take your rightful place in the music world." "Yes," she whispered, then more firmly, "Yes." After hanging up, Eleanor sat at her desk, overwhelmed by the speed at which her life was changing. A week ago, she had been a widow, drifting through her days, her identity subsumed by grief and decades of self-effacement. Now she was a composer, a professor, a woman standing firmly in her own power. She opened her laptop again and watched the video once more, this time with new eyes, not as Eleanor Winters watching herself play, but as Professor Winters studying a piece that needed to be developed, refined, perhaps expanded into a full composition for her students to analyze. The doorbell rang, interrupting her thoughts. When she opened it, a delivery man stood there with a large bouquet of Lily, her favorite flowers, though few people knew that. Eleanor Winters, he confirmed, handing her the arrangement. She thanked him and carried the flowers to her kitchen. Searching for the card. It was from Margaret, her lawyer friend. Congratulations on finding your voice again. The world has been waiting to hear it. Eleanor smiled, touched by Margaret's thoughtfulness. She must have spoken to James about the teaching position as she arranged the lilies in a vase. Her phone buzzed with another text from Sophia. Professor Williams just announced you're joining the faculty. Everyone's talking about it. When can we start working on your compositions for publication? Publication. The word sent a thrill of both terror and excitement through Eleanor. To see her music in print, to have it performed by others, to leave that legacy, it was more than she had dared to dream. Even a week ago, she texted back one step at a time. Let's start with the student showcase next month. Sophia's reply was immediate. Yes. What will you play? Your improvisation. Something new. Can I help? 1 month later, Eleanor stood backstage at the conservatory's recital hall, her heart pounding in her chest. The student showcase was sold out unusual for what was typically a sparsely attended event. And she knew it was because word had spread about her performance. Nervous? James asked, appearing beside her in his formal attire. Terrified, Eleanor admitted with a small laugh. I haven't performed in public since I was 22. It's like riding a bicycle, he assured her, though they both knew it wasn't. Besides, they already love you. The video of your improvisation has over 50,000 views online. Eleanor shook her head in disbelief. When Sophia had first told her that someone had uploaded the video to YouTube, she'd been mortified. But as comments poured in, many from older women thanking her for inspiring them to return to abandon passions, she'd come to see it as a gift rather than an invasion. 5 minutes. Professor Winters, the stage manager, called, and Eleanor felt a thrill at the title. She'd been teaching for 3 weeks now, and each class felt like coming home to a place she'd never been but somehow always belonged. Is Michael coming? James asked. Gently. Eleanor nodded. He said he would. Front row, with Lisa. Their relationship was still healing, still fragile, but Michael had made genuine efforts to understand her journey. Lisa remained coolly polite, but Eleanor had made peace with the fact that not everyone would applaud her transformation. Sophia appeared, resplendent in a concert black dress. Ready for our duet, Professor? Eleanor smiled at her student now, also her teaching assistant and, increasingly, her friend. As ready as I'll ever be. They had decided to perform together, Eleanor playing her original composition, now titled Reclamation, with Sophia joining for the final movement on a second. Piano, the piece had evolved significantly from the improvisation, becoming more structured but no less emotional. Ladies and gentlemen, the dean's voice echoed from the stage. It is my great pleasure to introduce our newest faculty member, Professor Eleanor Winters, performing an original composition with graduate student Sophia Chen. The applause was warm as Eleanor walked onto the stage, the spotlight momentarily blinding her. She blinked, adjusting to the light, and saw Michael in the front row, as promised. Beside him sat not Lisa, but Vanessa and her 2 daughters, their expressions curious rather than hostile. Eleanor settled at the Steinway, not her old upright, which remained in storage as a cherished heirloom, but a magnificent concert grand the conservatory had provided for her use. She had come to love its responsive action, its rich tone, the way it seemed to anticipate her musical intentions. She placed her hands on the keys, took a deep breath, and began to play. The piece started softly, tentatively, like a voice that had been silent too long, unsure of its own sound. Gradually, it gained confidence, building in complexity and volume, weaving together themes of loss and discovery, silence and expression. When Sophia joined for the final movement, their pianos conversed like old friends reuniting after a long separation, sharing stories of where they had been and where they hoped to go. As the final notes faded, there was a moment of complete silence. That precious space between sound and response that every musician treasures. Then the audience erupted in applause, rising to their feet in a standing ovation that brought tears to Eleanor's eyes. She and Sophia bowed together. Then Eleanor stepped forward for a solo bow. As she straightened, she caught Michael's eye. He was applauding vigorously, his face shining with what looked like pride and, perhaps, a new understanding of who his mother had always been beneath the roles of wife and mother. Backstage, after the performance, Eleanor was surrounded by students and faculty offering congratulations. James handed her a glass of champagne, his eyes twinkling. To new beginnings, he toasted. And to the Eleanor Winters the world should have known decades ago. No, she corrected gently, clinking her glass against his. To the Eleanor Winters, who exists now shaped by every choice, every sacrifice, every joy and sorrow. I wouldn't trade the life I've lived, James. I just want to live what remains of it fully. Michael appeared at the edge of the group, looking slightly out of place among the musicians, but determined nonetheless. When he reached Eleanor, he embraced her awkwardly. "That was beautiful, Mom," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I had no idea, ... I mean, I knew you played, but not like that." "Thank you for coming," she replied, squeezing his hand. "It means a lot to me. Vanessa wanted to come too," he admitted. She said she wanted the girls to see what's possible when you don't give up on your passion. Eleanor blinked back tears, touched by the unexpected gesture from her daughter-in-law's sister. "I have something for you," Michael continued, reaching into his jacket pocket and pulling out a small velvet box. "It was Dad's. He asked me to give it to you if you ever found your way back to music." Eleanor opened the box with trembling fingers. Inside was a delicate silver brooch in the shape of a piano. "He bought it years ago," Michael explained. "After he heard you playing late one night when you thought everyone was asleep. He said it was the most beautiful sound in the world, and he wished you would share it more often." A sob caught in Eleanor's throat. "He never said anything." "I didn't want to pressure you," Michael said softly. "He knew you had your reasons for setting it aside. But he always hoped you'd find your way back." Eleanor pinned the brooch to her concert black dress, her heart full to bursting with grief and grief for the years of silence. Gratitude for the symphony that still remained to be played. In the weeks that followed, Eleanor settled into her new routine, teaching 3 days a week, composing in her newly rented studio with its baby grand piano, giving private lessons to Sophia and a select few other students. She had lunch with Margaret every Thursday, dinner with Michael and his family once a month, and regular coffee with James to discuss music department politics. Her apartment no longer felt empty without the old upright. Instead, it was filled with new energy sheet music spread across her desk. Student compositions waiting to be reviewed, invitations to speak at music education conferences. Even a contract from a small but respected publishing house interested in her work. One afternoon, as she was leaving the conservatory after her advanced composition seminar, she noticed an elderly woman waiting in the hallway, clutching a worn music portfolio. "Professor Winters," the woman asked hesitantly. "I hope you don't mind my waiting for you like this. I'm Harriet Simmons. I was ... inspired by your video." Eleanor smiled warmly. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Harriet. I used to compose years ago," Harriet continued, her voice gaining strength. "Nothing professional, just for myself. But after seeing you play, well, I started again. And I wondered if you might look at something I've written." Eleanor felt a surge of emotion, recognition, solidarity, purpose. "I'd be honored," she said, gesturing toward her office. "Would you like to come in?" As they walked together, Eleanor realized that her journey had come full circle. Her reclamation of self wasn't just for her, it was a beacon for others who had set aside their passions, their voices, their essential selves in service to other roles and responsibilities. That evening, she sat at her desk and began to write. Not music this time, but an open letter to women like herself. Women who had forgotten or been forced to forget who they were beneath the layers of duty and expectation. She wrote about the courage it takes to reclaim one's voice. It's the joy of rediscovery. It's the power of refusing to believe it's ever too late to become who you might have been. When she finished, she read it aloud to herself, hearing the strength in her own voice, a voice that had been silenced for too long but now rang out clear and true. Like a perfect note sustained against the silence. If you've been moved by Eleanor's journey, remember that it's never too late to reclaim your own voice, your own passions, your own identity. Subscribe to our channel for more stories of courage, transformation, and self-discovery. Like and share this video if you know someone who needs to be reminded of their own worth and potential, because every one of us deserves to live fully, to express ourselves authentically, and to leave our unique mark on the world, no matter our age, no matter our past, no matter what others expect of us. Your story isn't over until you say it is.